Welcome to Washington Today from Monday, July 14th, 2025. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thank you for joining us. President Trump is upping the ante with Russia to end its war with Ukraine. He made two announcements today. First, 100% tariffs on any country that trades with Russia, unless a ceasefire is reached within 50 days. And second, a weapons deal with NATO members to send weapons to Ukraine. This comes as a bipartisan Senate bill that puts sanctions on Russia that its two lead sponsors say could be the sledgehammer the president needs to end the conflict. Comes up in the Senate. We'll hear from the president, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, and Senators Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal, the two men behind the sanctions bill, coming up. Also, in the Senate, Republicans are focused on their bill to take back more than $9 billion in federal funds, including for public broadcasting and foreign aid. This is the same House Republican bill that passed last month in the House, and the Senate has until Friday to approve it. But it's facing opposition from a handful of Republican holdouts over those foreign aid cuts, and also from Democrats who say any rescissions would hurt future bipartisan government funding talks. We'll tell you all about it coming up. The Associated Press reporting that it wasn't immediately clear what products could be targeted by the tariffs announced by the president today. But here's what he said in the Oval Office.
And we've made a deal today, and I'm going to have Mark speak about it, but we've made a deal today where we are going to be sending them weapons and they're going to be paying for them. The United States, will not be having any payment made. We're not buying it, but we will manufacture it and they're going to be paying for it. Our last meeting of a month ago was very successful in that they agreed to 5%, which is more than $1 trillion a year, so they have a lot of money. And these are wealthy nations. They have a lot of money, and they want to do it. They feel very strongly about it, and we feel strongly about it, too. But we're in for a lot of money, and we don't want to do anymore, and we can't. But we make the best, and we're going to be sending the best to NATO, and in some cases to maybe, at Mark's suggestion, if we go to Germany, where they're going to send early on missiles, and they'll be replaced, and NATO is going to take care of it. It's going to be coordinated by NATO, and they're going to work very much with Matt Whitaker, who's right here, who's a great ambassador, and Matt's going to be coordinating. You better do a good job, Matt.
I will.
But Matt's going to coordinate. He's a very talented guy. He's going to coordinate everything. So in a nutshell, we're going to make top-of-the-line weapons, and they'll be sent to NATO. NATO may choose to have certain of them sent to other countries where we can get a little additional speed, where the country will release something and it'll be mostly in the form of a replacement.
And we heard NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte was at today's announcement. Here's what he had to say.
This is really big. This is really big. You called me on Thursday that you had taken a decision. And the decision is that you want Ukraine, what it needs to have to maintain, to be able to defend itself against Russia, but you don't want the Europeans to pay for it, which is totally logical. And this is building on the tremendous success of the NATO summit. The 5%, but also the decision to keep Ukraine strong and the decision to increase our defense industrial production. So based on that, that was Europe stepping up. This is again Europeans stepping up. So I've been in contact with many countries. I can tell you that at this moment, Germany massively, but also Finland and Denmark and Sweden and Norway, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Canada, they all want to be part of this. And this is only the first wave. There will be more. So what we will do is work through the NATO systems to make sure that we know what Ukrainians need, so that we can make packages. Of course, in a way, we discussed it this morning with Pete Hegseth at the Pentagon, in a way that, of course, the US will put on its stockpiles necessary to defend this country. That's absolutely clear. But it will mean that Ukraine can get its hands on really massive numbers of military equipment, both for air defense, but also missiles, ammunition, etc., etc. So if I was Vladimir Putin today and hear you speaking about what you were planning to do in 50 days and this announcement, I would reconsider whether I should not take negotiations about Ukraine more seriously than I was doing at the moment, if I was Vladimir Putin. But when I'm Ukraine, I think this is really great news for that. So I really want to thank you for that. And it means the Europeans paying for it. And again, I mentioned all these countries, we will deal with that. And exactly as you said, it might also mean that countries will move equipment fast into Ukraine, and then the US later backfilling it because speed is of the essence here.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, and Reuters reporting that the weapons package would include the Patriot air defense missiles. And in writing about the tariffs, they call it, quote, a major shift in Western sanctions policy. Throughout the more than 3-year-old war, Western countries have cut off most of their own financial ties to Moscow, but have held back from taking steps that would restrict Russia from selling its oil elsewhere. That has allowed Moscow to continue earning hundreds of billions of dollars from shipping oil to buyers such as China and India. Reuters goes on to write, still, Trump announcement of a 50-day grace period was greeted with relief by investors in Russia, where the ruble recovered from earlier losses and stock markets rose. That's from Reuters today. Here's more from the Oval Office.
What was the tipping point for you in making this decision? Was it a conversation with President Putin? Was it a piece of intelligence? And why are you giving 50 more days?
I think it's a very short period of time. I think, don't forget, I've just really been involved in this for not very long. And it wasn't initial focus. This is a Biden war. This is a Democrat war, not a Republican or Trump war. This is a war that would have never happened. It shouldn't have happened. A lot of people being killed. When the final numbers come in, you're going to see a lot more people are being killed in this war than you think, than you've been writing about. It's a very deadly war. They're all bad, but this is a very deadly war. The numbers are going to be far greater. When an apartment house comes down and they say 2 people were slightly injured. No, many people were killed. And those numbers will be at some point accurately reported. So far, they're not. It's a deadly war. I think that you're just going to see. I think you're going to see strong movement. I hope so. I hope so.
And what about
the secondary tariffs are very, very powerful.
What about the tariffs that the Republicans in the House and the Senate have ready? Those were 500%. Sure. Why are you doing 100%?
Well, the Republicans are moving very strongly in the Senate, giving us total control of it. But I'm not sure we need it, but it's certainly good that they're doing it. And Lindsey Graham's working hard. The whole John Thune, all of them, they're all working hard. And they're in coordination with Mike Johnson, Speaker in the House. And I think they've actually crafted a pretty good piece of legislation. It's probably going to pass very easily. And that includes Democrats. And there's some little tweaks. But I don't want to say I don't need it because I don't want them to waste their time. It could be very useful. We'll have to see. But we can do secondary. We're probably talking about 100% or something like that.
So can you clarify?
We can do secondary tariffs without the Senate, without the House. But what they're crafting also could be very good.
Delaware Democratic Senator Chris Coons, who's on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, posted on social media today, quote, I'm heartened that Trump is realizing that Putin is the only obstacle to peace in Ukraine. Today's announcement should help ensure that Ukrainians fighting for freedom have the weapons they need to defend themselves so they can be better positioned to secure a lasting peace. And we heard that question about the Senate sanctions package. That bill would allow the president to levy a 500% tariff on imports from countries that purchase Russian uranium, gas, and oil. Here are the bill's lead sponsors, Connecticut Democrat Richard Blumenthal and South Carolina Republican Lindsey Graham, who talked about it yesterday on CBS News Face the Nation. Here's Senator Blumenthal.
This has to be a critical moment for these sanctions, and bringing down this sledgehammer at this moment was emphasized by all of the European allies who were at the meeting that Senator Graham and I attended in Europe. They are absolutely in solidarity, one after another, in that closed-door setting, express the view that these sanctions have to be tough and rigorous to change behavior. And so the waiver language that we will have in this bill is very much alike the provisions that have existed in past similar measures that give the president the ability to act in the national security, but also provide congressional oversight. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of assurance to my Democratic colleagues is very important. But what is most important, I think, at this moment is our unity. Senator Graham and I Republican and Democrat coming together, the European leaders with diverse views, also in unity. And we want to make use of the seized assets, again, in a unified way. I think a multifaceted approach here is the only way to bring Putin to the table, because he's a thug. He understands only force.
And here's Senator Graham.
Putin has calculated that we would get tired and Europe would get weary. He made a huge mistake. NATO is bigger and stronger, and we're more committed than ever to make sure he does not take Ukraine by force. So Congress is on the verge of passing the most consequential sanction package in the history of the country. It will give President Trump tools he doesn't have today, a literal sledgehammer. And the big offender here is China, India, and Brazil. India buys oil from Russia cheap and resells it. That's despicable. I've talked to President Trump. He said last week it's time to move. He's tried to entice Putin to the table, but my goal is to end this war, and the only way you're going to end this war is to get people who prop up Putin, make them choose between the American economy and helping Putin, and you can only have one negotiator, and that's going to be President Trump with maximum flexibility to end this war. China, India, and Brazil, you're about to get hurt big time if you keep helping Putin.
South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham and Connecticut Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal on CBS News Face the Nation yesterday. And late this afternoon, Politico reporting that Senate Majority Leader John Thune said today he would hold off on advancing the sanctions package targeting Russia's trading partners after President Trump said he was prepared to act himself later this summer if Russia doesn't move toward a peace deal with Ukraine. Politico quotes Senator Thune saying, "It sounds like right now the president is going to attempt to do some of this on his own. If at some point the president concludes that it makes sense and adds value and leverage that he needs in those negotiations to move the bill, then we'll do it. We'll be ready to go." That from Senator Thune. Now to the Republican funding cuts bill in the Senate this week. As we said, they have until Friday to pass this bill. It's the same bill that passed the House last month by 2 votes. In total, it cuts $9.4 billion in federal funding. And according to the AP, that includes $1.1 billion in cuts to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, 2/3 of which that money helps fund local public radio and TV stations for their operations. It also includes $8.3 billion in foreign aid programs. Among them, $900 million to combat HIV, AIDS, malaria, and other diseases, $800 million for a program that provides emergency shelter, water, and sanitation in war-ravaged countries, $4.15 billion for 2 economic, civil, and institutional development programs in developing and strategically important countries, and $496 million for food, water, and health aid in countries hit by natural disasters and conflicts. Other cuts are aimed at the global HIV/AIDS program known as PEPFAR, which is credited with saving 26 million lives around the world and has broad bipartisan support in Congress. Republicans who have voiced concern about this bill include Senate Appropriations Chair Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, and Mike Rounds of South Dakota. In his Leader Time remarks this afternoon, Republican leader John Thune talked about the 2026 agriculture bill.
Mr. President, the appropriations process is officially underway here in the Senate. Last week, the Appropriations Committee held its first markup of appropriations bills for fiscal year 2026. And I'm pleased to report that the committee referred 2 bills to the floor with bipartisan support. And today I want to talk about one of the bills that came out of last week's markup, and that's the agriculture appropriations bill. Mr. President, agriculture is the lifeblood of our country. And in places like my home state of South Dakota, farming and ranching are a big part of our way of life. I know how hard American farmers and ranchers work to deliver food, fuel, and fiber to America and to the world. And I know this work can be challenging and at times unforgiving. In recent years, farmers and ranchers across the country have faced some pretty fierce headwinds. Higher input costs and depressed commodity prices strained their budgets, and higher interest rates made financing more difficult. Then there were the supply chain disruptions, natural disasters and drought, and things like bird flu, African swine fever, and the New World screwworm that threatened livestock. Mr. President, just 2 weeks ago, Republicans passed a reconciliation bill that addresses many of the challenges head-on by bolstering programs that farmers and ranchers depend on. But as I said then, farmers and ranchers' priorities are going to continue to be a priority here in the Senate. And the Agricultural Appropriations Bill is an example of that. Mr. President, our colleagues on the Appropriations Committee have reported a bill that provides robust funding to support America's farmers and ranchers. It provides important funding to the Farm Service Agency, including support for $10.5 billion in capital access for farmers and ranchers. And it supports efforts to track foreign-owned land to prevent our adversaries like China from buying up America's farmland. It also makes investment in rural development programs at USDA. In South Dakota, that money goes far in supporting water programs, electricity, and broadband programs in rural areas. This bill also invests in conservation programs, and it advances efforts to help farmers and ranchers get their products to the market. I'm glad to see support for processing capacity for meat, poultry, and egg products. And I'm pleased that this bill also promotes programs that help state-inspected plants operate across state lines, which provides producers with more options for their products and supports smaller processors. The bill also includes funding for the Agriculture Marketing Service to help facilitate greater access to international markets for American agriculture products. And the updated market data that will result from investments in this bill will help farmers and ranchers make better decisions about their businesses.
Part of Senate Republican leader John Thune's Leader Time remarks. Now, the Republicans' rescissions package was on the mind of Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer.
The so-called rescissions package continues the destructive Republican pattern. Cut now, ask questions later. The same thing that's happening with FEMA and the National Weather Service is happening right here. Again, use that chainsaw. Cut, cut, cut. Don't look at what you're cutting, what its effect will be, whether it's waste or whether it's sinew and bone. And then later say, oh, maybe we shouldn't have done that. And you know what, Mr. President? Our Republican senators, most of them, know this is wrong, but they're so afraid of Donald Trump. Yesterday, he threatened any of them who voted against the full rescissions package that we have before us would face his wrath. What is going on here? Does anyone stand up to these horrible, horrible cuts that hurt the American people? Republicans in real time are cutting health care. They're cutting education. They're cutting aid for our veterans. Veterans are not getting, they ask them, the veterans know they're not getting the health care they used to. And making things even worse, Donald Trump's tariffs are coming in at the worst possible time. And in a few short months, they're going to raise the cost of groceries. They're going to hurt small businesses and do untold damage to our economy. And now this package suffocates public broadcast. Well, did they even know when they said they wanted to cut it? You know, Donald Trump doesn't seem to like it. How much it helps our rural communities. It's the only place they can rely on for local news, for weather reports. That farmers across rural America depend on public broadcast to get weather reports because there's no other way. Did they know that it guts international aid that ensures America's national security? Did they even think of the consequences? Just because Donald Trump says he wants it cut and everyone knows he doesn't know the details of any of this stuff. The rescissions package is certainly troubling, but the pattern behind it is even worse. It sets the stage for even more party line, devastating cuts in the future to health care, to education, anything Republicans decide they don't like, all on a party line vote, all because of obeisance and fear of Donald Trump, not a conviction that he's doing the right thing. This is a dark omen moving forward.
Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer. And Politico Congress reporter Jordan Carney reporting Missouri Republican Senator Eric Schmidt, who is spearheading the rescissions package in the Senate, was at the White House this afternoon to meet with President Trump on the funding clawback. Per person familiar with what happened there, White House Budget Director Russell Vought is also coming to the Hill tomorrow, according to Jordan Carney, and she's also reporting the Senate wants to take first votes on this bill on Tuesday. Now, you can see the Senate's consideration of this bill live all week on C-SPAN 2, cspan.org, and the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. The House is also back to work this week. On their agenda, several cybersecurity bills, including legislation requiring the Commerce Department's National Telecommunications Agency to examine the cybersecurity of wireless networks, and a bill directing the Consumer Product Safety Commission to create a pilot program to study the use of AI. House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries spoke to reporters today. One of the issues on his mind, today's White House Russia announcement.
Vladimir Putin has spent the entire year punking Donald Trump and the Trump administration. Donald Trump promised many things to the American people and continues to betray the American people and break promise after promise after promise in a whole lot of areas, including Donald Trump's promise that there would be peace in Ukraine on day one of his presidency. How is that working out? Donald Trump has spent the first 6 months of his presidency playing footsie with Vladimir Putin. And the response from Vladimir Putin, a sworn enemy of the United States of America, has been to unleash terror on Ukrainian children, communities, and civilians. Donald Trump has zero credibility in this area. Is he just now figuring out that Ukraine is a friend to the United States of America and Russia is an enemy? Is he just now figuring out that the United States should always stand on the side of democracy, freedom, and truth, which is standing with Ukraine as opposed to standing on the side of authoritarianism, tyranny, and propaganda, which is what he's been doing by standing with Russia and Vladimir Putin? Is he just now figuring this out? Congress has to act independently in this area, and we should sanction Russia and continue to keep the pressure on Vladimir Putin and Russia, a sworn enemy of this country, until the Ukrainian people are able to achieve victory for themselves, our NATO allies in Europe, and the free world.
And from USA Today, Texas Democratic Representative Mark Veazey has introduced a resolution calling for the release of all unclassified files related to the Jeffrey Epstein case. Representative Veazey posted on social media yesterday, quote, either Trump and his acolytes fueled the rumors of the significance of these Epstein files to help his campaign, or something is there. Put up or shut up. USA Today noting that candidate Donald Trump said last year that he would support releasing additional details about the Epstein case, but a memo by the Justice Department and FBI that came out July 7th reported no evidence of a client list or that Epstein had been murdered while in custody. This comes after President Trump posted on social media over the weekend his support for Attorney General Pam Bondi and FBI Director Kash Patel's handling of the case, writing, quote, let's not waste time and energy on Jeffrey Epstein, somebody that nobody cares about. But Leader Jeffries was asked about it this afternoon.
The American people deserve to know the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth as it relates to this whole sordid Jeffrey Epstein matter. Democrats didn't put the Jeffrey Epstein thing into the public domain. This was a conspiracy that Donald Trump, Pam Bondi, and these MAGA extremists have been fanning the flames of for the last several years. And now the chickens are coming home to roost. The American people deserve to know the truth. What, if anything, is the Trump administration and the Department of Justice hiding? What are you hiding? If you're not hiding anything, prove that to the American people. And if you are trying to hide something, as many of Donald Trump's MAGA supporters apparently believe, then the Congress should actually work hard to try to uncover the truth for the American people. There are only two things that are possible here. Option one Donald Trump, Pam Bondi, and the MAGA extremists intentionally lied to the American people for years about the Jeffrey Epstein situation. That's option one. Option two is that, in fact, there's reason for the American people to be concerned as it relates to what information has not been released that could be damaging to the Trump administration and the friends and family of the Trump administration and their billionaire corrupt supporters. And so they're actively engaging in a cover-up. Option one, they lied for years. Option two, they're engaging in a cover-up. At this point, it seems reasonable that can only be one of the two things. And so it's Congress's responsibility in a bipartisan way to ask the questions and try to get answers on behalf of the American people.
Can I follow up? Two of your members have introduced or announced legislation to either force or urge the administration to release all the files related to Jeffrey Epstein. Have you had a conversation with those members? Do you plan to? Do you support those pieces of legislation?
I haven't had a conversation with those members or an opportunity to evaluate the resolution and the legislation. However, I think transparency and sunlight for the American people is always the better course of action.
House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries speaking to reporters earlier today. And here's Jasmine Wright, White House reporter for Notice.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question as what happens going forward. Obviously, President Trump has been vocal over the weekend in that social media post, basically saying it was time to put the Epstein files behind his MAGA base. But I talked to one MAGA strategist who is close to the White House, who basically said that the president's base is unmoved by that post, telling people to move on, but also telling people to kind of lay off Attorney General Pam Bondi, who has basically faced the brunt of the attacks when it comes to how this administration has handled the Epstein files. So folks in that base are unmoved, and they're going to continue asking questions. I think that the onus is now on President Trump to see how he continues to respond. If he basically ignores his base, something that folks have been vocal about, saying that for really the first time in this first 6 months, they view it as Trump misjudging the moment or misjudging where his base is at. We know that President Trump is somebody who likes to check in on his base and who likes to be up to date on how they're feeling and how they're reacting to the post. So there's going to be a question about how President Trump handles this, but also a question about how Deputy FBI Chief Dan Bongino handles this. Obviously, we know that he did not show up for work on Friday. Notice was able to confirm because he was so upset at Pam Bondi over her handling of the Epstein case. So there's going to be a question of whether or not he shows up today. He shows up the rest of the week, and how long he does stay with the administration. But obviously, there are some major questions that they're going to have to decide on in that building behind me about how they go forward, because we know that President Trump likes to be very loyal to his base because he feels as though they are very loyal to him. But in this case, they're having a real issue.
Jasmine Wright, White House reporter for Notice, on this morning's Washington Journal on the White House handling of the Jeffrey Epstein files. You're listening to Washington Today.
In a nation divided, a rare moment of unity. This fall, C-SPAN presents Ceasefire, where the shouting stops and the conversation begins. In a town where partisan fighting prevails. One table, two leaders, one goal, to find common ground. This fall, Ceasefire, on the network that doesn't take sides, only on C-SPAN.
Welcome back to Washington Today. From Politico late this afternoon, a divided Supreme Court has cleared the way for the Education Department to fire almost 40% of its workforce 4 months after President Trump ordered his administration to begin closing down the department. The justices, by an apparent 6-3 vote, lifted an injunction from a federal judge in Boston that was granted back in May against the firing. That judge found that the staff cuts were so drastic they would prevent the department from carrying out duties mandated by Congress. The judge also said the mass firings appear to be part of Trump's plan to eliminate the education department entirely, despite a lack of congressional authorization to do so. That from Politico late this afternoon. Yesterday was the one-year anniversary of the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, and today a group of Republican Study Committee members introduced a resolution marking the anniversary. Here's Pennsylvania Republican Mike Kelly, whose hometown of Butler, Pennsylvania, was where the attack occurred.
Yesterday, I returned to the Butler Farm Showgrounds, where I was with the president a year ago. I met with the Compatory family during a celebration of Corey's life. They are incredibly strong, and I know all of us on stage continue to send our thoughts and prayers to them as we seek more answers about what actually happened that day. Now, we're here today to highlight new resolution H.R. 571, which formally recognized the events of 2014 and July 13th in Butler, Pennsylvania. The resolution also condemns the rise in political violence we have seen across our nation over the last year. From the assassination attempts against President Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, and West Palm Beach, Florida, to the attacks against Governor Josh Shapiro in April, and to the deadly attacks on the Minnesota state lawmakers just last month. Let's be clear. We must stand up together to oppose violence against our nation's leaders all across each party. And I want to thank my co-lead on the resolution, RSC Chairman August Pfluger from Texas. When we talk about this, though, we can have as many resolutions as we want to bring it forward. And I've heard person after person, politician after politician get up and say, I am absolutely appalled by the violence that's taking place in this country today. And we've got to stop using that type of language. And with 24 hours, they're out talking again about who should not be sitting in certain offices. So it's one thing to have a resolution. It's one thing to be resolved, the fact we're not going to keep talking like this. When I'm asking all our everybody that's in the Congress, everybody that's in elected office, please watch what you say. Don't start off saying we should never do this, and then within 24 hours go out and make statements again that incite people. That's a false lead. It's a false premise. Our resolution is an attempt to get people to speak the way they should speak. In America, the way we settle things is by votes.
Pennsylvania Republican Congressman Mike Kelly. And in an article on cityandstatepa.com, Representative Kelly said he still wonders why federal law enforcement agencies allowed Donald Trump to go on stage that day, saying, quote, they knew there was a suspicious person on the grounds for an hour and a half before the president came out on the stage. After everything was said and done, I still ask, why did they let President Trump come out on the stage when they knew the site was not secure? That will forever be my question. Also from today, from CBS12.com in Palm Beach, Florida, what was meant to be a surprise inspection turned into a tightly managed tour. But what Florida lawmakers saw inside Alligator Alcatraz left them horrified. On Saturday afternoon, 4 Florida representatives, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Darren Soto, Maxwell Frost, and Jared Moskowitz, were given what they call a sanitized tour of Alligator Alcatraz from officials at Florida's Division of Emergency Management and also federal officials. The members stated that despite the alleged limited access and sanitation of the tour, the conditions were, quote, horrific. They reported seeing people held in cages, unsanitary eating conditions, people begging for freedom, a man who said he had been hospitalized for days, among other concerning conditions. Representative Frost talked about what he saw in a town hall on Saturday.
These are very nuts and bolts questions. Do you know how many people are there? Is the gender breakdown, is it all males? And are they from all over the country or are they all from Florida?
There's just under 1,000 people there right now. Their goal is to get to 4,000 capacity, 4,000 beds by August, in a couple weeks here. They're going to be adding an additional 1,000 beds to it within the next week or so. And we saw that those new cages that they were working on. The demographic, this facility is all males over the age of 18. It is a mix of people. There are a lot of people there who just have a civil offense or just something very low that they were picked up for, all the way up to people who have done, violent crimes and all in between. There is a wristband system when they arrive that they put on them to determine what kind of offense they had. Most of them being civil offenses and small offenses, and they do not have them segregated. It's just a big hodgepodge of people all put together. And I asked a few questions on mental health issues and on how people can seek mental health help. If they are, if I asked the company, there's a third-party company that's doing all the medical work. I'm looking through my notes to try to find a name for you guys. The third-party company that's doing all the medical work, I asked them, how often are you asked by the people running the facility who might not be able to be put in the general population because of a mental health condition or because of this and that? They weren't able to answer the questions, and it looks like there's not a ton of communication on that front either. This leads me to another thing that I forgot to mention that I think is really important. This facility, when we first pulled up, it was mainly third-party security companies that were running the parking and the security and all of this. Then we get into the facility, and when we were at the tent where all the cages are, the people holding us back and the people in there dealing with the detainees were from a third-party security company. We barely saw any federal agents, a few people from the National Guard, a few people who are trained law enforcement officers, but it was mainly essentially cops for hire. Not any different than the people who wand you, if you were to go into a concert or go to a sports game. And these are a lot of the folks who are dealing with the detainees, transporting them around the facility, and are essentially running the whole thing. So this is also a huge source of taxpayer money just going to corporations, but also what worries me, too, is these people do not have the training you need to run a facility like this.
Florida Democratic Representative Maxwell Frost on a town hall on Saturday talking about what he saw at the immigrant detention facility known as Alligator Alcatraz. CBS12.com also reporting that Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis defended the management of that detention facility, saying, quote, "It's not the Four Seasons. It's a professional processing center to effectuate the deportation of illegal aliens. That's what it's for. It's professionally run. It's going to be value added." And from CNBC.com, dozens of U.S. ice cream producers say they are planning to remove artificial colors from their products by 2028. CNBC writes the producers, which represent more than 90% of ice cream sold in the U.S., are the latest food companies to take voluntary steps to remove dyes since Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said back in April that the U.S. aimed to phase out many synthetic dyes from the country's food supply. Secretary Kennedy talked about it at an event today that included Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins and officials from the International Dairy Foods Association.
I'm particularly happy to be here today because this is relevant to my favorite food, which is ice cream. And I want to, since we came in about 5.5 months ago, and started talking about eliminating dyes and other bad chemicals from our food, we've had this extraordinary response from the industry. And Brooke just rattled off this extraordinary inventory of national corporate food producers have all made commitments to remove food dyes from their food. And with this addition today of the dairymen and the dairy food producers, we now have about 35% of American food industry that has made commitments, and that's addition between 35 and 40%. And that is in addition to the 35% of the food industry that was already organic and healthy and chemical-free.
Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. CNBC notes several major food manufacturers, including General Mills, Kraft Heinz, J.M. Smucker, Hershey, and Nestle USA, have previously announced their plans to phase out synthetic food coloring. The IDFA said artificial dyes are safe, but that ice cream makers are taking this step in part to avoid disruption to sales from state efforts to phase out dyes from school foods and also West Virginia's recent food dye ban. You can see more from all of these events at cspan.org and the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. That's also where you can get our complete congressional coverage and where you can find this program as a podcast. You can also find it on YouTube. Just search Washington Today. And for more on the stories that are shaping Washington every day, get our daily email word for word. You can go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.